One of the little secrets in the hospital business that isn't well known outside of hospitals are the junk closets. The little graveyards that are spread around in hospitals where the products that are purchased that seemed like such a great idea at the time and the demo was so exciting. You get the product and you try to use it and ew, it just doesn't do what you thought it would do, and it ends up in the junk closet. And I used to work at one of the hospitals here in the medical center many years ago. They had numerous junk closets filled with lots of stuff. So, and I sort of I was reminded of that hearing the comments of my colleagues and some of the, I don't want to call it necessarily unfulfilled expectations, but maybe poorly understood expectations, poorly defined expectations that a product sort of forces you to come to grips with what those expectations really are, or what those requirements really are, and then try and fit that to your day-to-day work. And sometimes it fits, sometimes it doesn't. It seems like it's sort of a catch as catch can. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is is what we can do to make sure that we can not fill up any more junk closets. And that's workflow. A lot of people think about workflow within the context of a product. Even caregivers, when they think of workflow, that like for the EMR, they think about, well, so what are the screens? What are the fields that I have to deal with? What's the next screen? What's the process or sequence of the screens? To them, that's workflow. And that is a layer of workflow, but the workflow that's really important, particularly when you're automating complex tasks like care delivery, is a bigger picture workflow, because any one product that you saw in those videos has little tentacles that come out from that product that impact other users, other products, whether they're information products or medical devices or supplies. And you have to take all of that into account to really understand what your workflow is and be able to articulate that. First of all, internally articulate it so that when you are talking to a vendor and you're telling them what you want, you can really accurately tell them exactly what you want so that they can hopefully respond to you in an unambiguous way so that you can select something that really does what you need it to do. And so one of the things that they do a good job of here that I think every hospital should, not every hospital has the opportunity to be an innovator like this and to have a space where they can simulate things, to try things. It's sort of the difference between a solution and a tool. I think Texas Children's and a small number or a small percentage of other hospitals are focused on tools, and they're looking to apply those tools in new and creative ways to improve patient care and safety and efficiency and all those other good things. Not every hospital has the luxury of buying a tool and figuring out how best to use it in their environment. Most hospitals want to buy a solution. I have this problem. What's your solution? Even in that kind of framework, you need to understand what your workflow is. You need to look at how you're doing things now in the area that'll be using that product. You need to have someone, you can have the caregivers just sit down and write a day in the life description. This is what I do, the steps that I do it in. And you need to capture, and medication administration is a great example of this. You need to capture all the exceptions. Because when you look at meds administration, it's like almost all exceptions, right? the drugs are in all different spots. They're administered in different ways, and it's a very complex process that's full of exceptions, and so it's consequently very hard to automate. But you need to document that. And there's a couple of different tools that you can use. One is use cases, and you can do a Google search for formal use case, and it will describe it's sort of like a narrative, but it's a very structured narrative so that you're gathering all the appropriate information. And if you do that for a product in a particular clinical area, you know this is what we do now. Because when you buy a new product and they implement it, the caregivers, the users, they know what they did before, and now they know what they have to do now. If the new process is fewer steps than what they had before, then they're happy, right? It's a success. Adoption's great. If they have to do more steps, it's junk closet time. So if you write down those requirements in a use case or a flow sheet, that's the other approach, is to have basically a flow sheet with boxes, and you can have branches for the different options and everything. It's the same information, it's just a different way of presenting it. But you give that to your vendors. This is our requirements, or at least one aspect of your requirements, and then you have the vendors reply with a document that defines what their workflow capabilities are, so that you can, in a concise manner, compare one to the other. I mean, you can see some of that during a demo, but you can't see all of it, and it's very easy to get, I don't want to say distracted, but there's all sorts of things that come into play when you're doing a demo that extend beyond workflow. And if they document that, then you can also include that information in your purchase agreement, so that when the product actually arrives, you have something that both you and the manufacturer can look to and say, okay, this is our gold standard. This is what we're trying to achieve. And then it becomes pretty clear whether, if there's any miss. Was it a requirements miss on the buyer side? Was it a workflow capability miss on the manufacturer side, and work that out? So I think workflow is also another area where the clinicians and the caregivers can really be empowered, because it's your life that you're living, right? You're the fish that's swimming in the workflow water, and you do it every day, and a lot of it you don't even think about. It's so automatic. But it's those kinds of automatic things that are just as important as the things that are that you struggle with from a workflow standpoint, that have to be documented so that all of that is addressed properly with your workflow automation solution, whatever it is. The other area, or the next point that I wanted to talk about, is road mapping. One of the things that strikes me about this event and the manufacturer partners that are here is that you have a lot of different solutions, pieces to a puzzle that's all integrated in the customer implementation, and it all works together. But they're all separate companies, they're all separate products. They have different product release dates for upgrades. They discontinue certain components or product models and come out with new ones. Even if you're buying everything new for a new building, which does make things a lot easier in some respects, you still have to think about your roadmap moving forward, because these manufacturers, they're independent entities. They don't all march in lockstep. And in different hospitals, you have different, or in different areas of the hospital, you have different associations or combinations of manufacturers. And so you need to have, manufacturers actually do this. They'll have a roadmap for all their products. And they'll look at, the parts that go in the product and what the suppliers can provide. They'll look at the different technologies that they're utilizing, and manufacturers of parts will end of life something, and do we re-engineer that part of the product to support the new part? Do we do a last time buy and buy a zillion parts so that we don't have to worry about it for another 5 years? Those are all issues that you need to deal with managing the technology that you've adopted. And when you have that in a roadmap, you can have a swim lane for each different component. And let's say you're in an existing, you're dropping a new system into an existing facility, and one of the components you're using is the phone system. Well, we've had that phone system for 5 years, and we're only going to keep it for another year. When you buy your new technology, you're adding and integrating with the phone system. You've got to integrate what you've got now, right? And then you're going to use that. So that needs to be on your roadmap so that you know to plan for that. Because there can be a lot of hidden costs associated with trying to accommodate those kind of evolutions of different parts of your solution. So road mapping is an important tool to identify for each swim lane all the different components that are involved, and the product discontinuations, upgrades, software patches, all that kind of stuff that occurs. And that sort of leads me to my final point, and that's what I call the governance gap between clinical engineering or biomedical engineering and IT. Back in the good old days, medical devices were standalone embedded system devices. You plugged it into the wall, you attached it to the patient, you turned it on. Very straightforward. All of the things that we use, medical device data systems and alarm notification systems and all that stuff, that was all done manually between the two ears of the caregiver or the technician using the medical device. So biomeds are geared towards that standalone embedded device in general. On the IT side, you run the IT for a hospital differently than you run the IT for a nuclear power plant. And when IT in the hospital just does patient accounting and ADT and general financial applications and those kinds of things, then that's fine. But the thing that's challenging both groups that sort of creates this gap is medical devices are transforming into information appliances that are integrated and supported by the IT infrastructure in the hospital. And so what that does is that makes the environment change closer to that of a nuclear power plant, where you have what they call in the industry a safety critical environment. So aerospace, airplanes are a safety critical environment. Nuclear power plants, a lot of military technology is a safety critical environment. Anywhere where if the technology fails, it could result in an injury or a death is a safety critical environment, and that certainly increasingly applies to hospitals and IT infrastructure in hospitals. And so a couple of examples of where I've found these gaps to be in a lot of places. One is in risk management. Typically, when you look at the risk management policies and procedures for biomeds or in clinical engineering, they focus on determining how often do I need to do preventive maintenance on this piece of equipment, and how often do I need to do calibration or recalibration on this piece of equipment. When you go and look at the risk management policies and procedures in IT, they look at security and confidentiality. No one's looking at patient safety. So when you're running these complex systems, you take a Connexol and a Rollenborg and a GE patient monitoring and some of these other systems, and you put them all on the enterprise network, that's a safety critical type of system. And so risk management needs to look at, so what can go wrong? And there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and you need to think of those things not from just a privacy and confidentiality or a preventive maintenance perspective, but from a patient safety perspective as well. Another area is configuration management. When these systems of systems that are regulated medical devices get installed in a hospital, the manufacturer, who's sort of the lead manufacturer for that solution, make sure that all of the different systems that they're integrating and leveraging in the hospital are all at the right software version, the firmware release is correct, everything's configured properly, the routing tables, the switches, all of that stuff is right within specifications so that it's safe and effective. When they walk out of the door, who continues with that? Where is it documented that if Cisco comes out with a new patch for our wireless controllers, what does that impact? What medical device systems are impacted by that? And what's our procedure for determining that we can implement that new firmware release for our controllers and that it's going to be safe and effective for all the different medical device systems that are using that wireless infrastructure? The other area is change control. Because these things change, and this sort of gets back to the whole road mapping thing too, only it's much more of a sort of where the rubber meets the road. Change control is when you actually decide, okay, somebody wants to change something. What exactly do they want to change? What are the potential impacts of that change? Let's do a little risk management or risk analysis on this change. And then you plan to actually execute the change. Typically, in a mission-critical IT environment, those are pretty much, all those issues and the decisions are driven by the institution. They decide whether they're going to make that change or not. But now if you've got all these other medical device systems that are involved in the change, now you have to go ask those manufacturers, well, have you tested your patient monitoring network with this new firmware version of the Cisco controller? And you should ask the folks at Connexall and some of these other manufacturers. And some of them may come back and say, yeah, we did a risk analysis and we really don't care. And this is why, based on our risk analysis in the design of our product, why it doesn't matter what version you're running on your controller. But there are also cases where, oh yeah, if this occurs, then we could miss an alarm, for example. So all three of those components are examples of, and there's others, policies and procedures should actually be controlled documents, not just a Word document that's on a shared drive somewhere on the network, because they are the roadmap that you're following to ensure that you deliver care in a safe and effective manner. So that's, I guess, the end of my comments. Hopefully somebody has a different point of view on some of those things and can set me right.